All right, everybody, I think we should get going. It's lovely to see you folks. Please introduce yourselves via the chat. And I'd love to introduce our board members. I think I've seen most of them. Ernie, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Okay, Scott, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. Steering board member here at the NCSA. Glad to be with you tonight.
And Muriel, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Muriel Nakar, NCSA steering board member. I'm glad everyone made the meeting today. Happy 7-Eleven day.
Is 7-Eleven, does that mean something?
It's a free, you get a free Slurpee, and it's very, for the whole month of like July, I think you get a free Slurpee. So I highly advise it because it's hot. It's really hot, yeah. And heat is a really big fat, like it's only going to get hotter. So.
But you got to bring your reusable cup into 7-Eleven. You can't use theirs.
Yeah.
And is Dawn there? I don't know if Dawn has joined us. And Ernie, are you able to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Ernie Hidalgo here with the steering board of NCSA. And apologies, I'm actually at a family function right now, so I can't be on camera, but I will be looking forward to today's presentations. Thank you.
Okay. I cannot advance my slide for some reason. All right. So this is super briefly our mission of the NCSA. Oh, and I should have introduced myself. I'm Lisa Hart, also on the steering board of the NCSA. And what our mission is to advance sustainability across the city through advocacy, sharing of best practices, and community action. And we have a bunch of committees and working groups. We'd love for you folks to join them, and we'll hear from a lot of these committees at the end of tonight's meeting. We are recording. If you could add your, well, maybe you don't, if you could add your name and or, add your neighborhood council organization next to your name, that would be really fun. And go ahead and introduce yourself. And Muriel will actually be changing your names, so don't freak out. She's going to do that to help us vote at the end of the meeting. This is going to be a pretty small group. We're pretty informal. You can chime in a lot, and you can also use the raise hand feature to participate. And I always forget what the option is on the phone. It's either *6 or *9. I hope if you're on the phone, you remember, because I'm hardly ever on the phone. And we have some community agreements that we will show you briefly. And we ask you folks to complete an evaluation because we're always looking to improve these. So please do take a minute or two to complete that. It's super, super helpful for us. The agenda for tonight, we're almost done with item number 1. Then we're going to speak with Raquel Beltran, who I see. She is the general manager of the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. So she'll be speaking to us for a little bit. And then I'm going to hand this over to Scott, who will be talking with us about some proposed changes to our bylaws. And then we'll be speaking with Luke Klipp, who used to be the president of the Los Feliz Neighborhood Council, about Paul Koretz's motion regarding parking minimums. Then we'll hear from our committees and do any brief announcements if you guys have things you want to share. And then we'll hope that you folks complete the evaluations. These are our community agreements. If you can, please do have your camera on because it's helpful to build community. Please assume good intent, give people the benefit of the doubt, demonstrate respect and appreciation. The chat is great, but it's ideal if the chat is about things germane to what we're talking about, not too many side tangents. Listen intently, contribute and let others do the same. Be as concise as you can, and of course, have fun. Alrighty. I am going to hand it over to Raquel, who I cannot see on my screen anymore. but I will see her shortly. Raquel Beltran, as I already said, is the general manager of Done. I'm so happy. Raquel, I really appreciate you offering to speak to us today. I have a couple questions for you, and then I'm going to hand it over to the group for anybody who wants to ask you questions. And we only have Raquel until 7, so our time is tight. So I want to jump in. But Raquel, I'm hoping there are a couple of things that you can mention up front. One is, I know this pandemic has been a really challenging year for everybody, particularly for the city, for several reasons, including the budget and so many other competing priorities. So I'd love to hear, and also the transition to everything via Zoom was a pretty big lift. So I'd love to hear where we are now, where the department is regarding all those things, regarding resources and COVID-related priorities and Zoom and anything else connected to that. Raquel, are you there?
Yes, yes, I'm here. Are you able to hear me at this point?
Yes.
Good, terrific. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for the introduction, Lisa, and for inviting me to join you today. It's a beautiful Sunday evening in Los Angeles. We're blessed to have a lovely, lovely weather right now. A lot of people in different parts
Eddie,
of the country.
Eddie, can you, sorry, I'm gonna have to, Eddie, if you could just mute yourself, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, Raquel, go ahead.
No, not a problem, not a problem. So that's a good, it's nice to be connected back up with all of you. And to your specific questions, and I'm happy to just start answering questions since we are short on time. I also like doing these meetings this way because I'm able to just address directly what's on your mind instead of, doing a whole going through a laundry list of things that may not be of interest to you. I usually hope that they're of interest to you, but they may not be the first things that are priorities. So I'm happy to just respond to questions and add other information as we go along. In terms of where the department is and tying that to COVID and the empowered virtual governance that all of you have mastered. I say that all the time. I'm in meetings with this. Been in meetings with the Zoom vice presidents. I've been in meetings with ITA this week. We were having conversations about what kind of support we might be able to get from them as it relates to creating a hybrid system for neighborhood councils, which is really the direction that we're in. That's where we're going to be spending some of our time. But I cannot talk about the empowered virtual governance without talking about all of you. It's neighborhood council leaders that mastered virtual governance. It isn't a virtual meeting like Zoom. We tell Zoom, your platform was not designed for what we do. You don't have a platform that has the overlay of parliamentary procedures and the Brown Act. You do meetings and you do conferences. What we've done is created a system that takes your platform and tries to create protocols and procedures and suggested settings to neighborhood councils so that they could manage virtual governance. And that's what you have done for 14 months. So I commend you for all of that. Boards and commissioners, city council members have city attorneys and they have city clerks to try to assist them with the logistics of all of that. You didn't have any of that. You had to learn that on your own. So I really commend all of you for that. So for that reason, as we talk about COVID is going to be here for a while in one form or another, hopefully, and always moving in a positive direction. And there are reasons to believe that will continue to be the case. But all of us are going to be treading carefully as we should. Hopefully always wearing masks where we should be wearing masks and kind of keeping abreast of what those protocols and recommendations are. We are going to continue to try to share that information with you so that you can share it with your constituents as we go forward. We've been trying to make sure that we keep you up to speed on what's current. We're going to continue to do that because that's our duty to you, is to keep you informed with accurate information about the pandemic and how it's evolving. Certainly for a lot of our communities, even if the pandemic were to be resolved as it relates to, from a health perspective, economically and personally, our communities are devastated. That might be, in my perspective, just given my experience, that's a 2 or 3 year kind of processes to get that kind of stability back in our communities. And I know that neighborhood councils will be at the forefront of trying to help their communities in their recovery, just like you always have been. So for us, creating a hybrid system is particularly important. We've been monitoring changes in the Brown Act. There have been 3 or 4 different pieces of legislation at a minimum that have been introduced to the state legislature. The most popular one that is talked about is AB 339. It's made progress. I don't know that it was approved in the last legislative session, otherwise we would have heard about it by now, obviously, but the governor did extend the temporary modifications to the Brown Act through the end of September. The Board of Neighborhood Commissioners has adopted a resolution requiring neighborhood councils to continue to meet virtually until December, as long as it's as permitted by law. So if in September, the Brown Act does not continue to be amended to allow virtual meetings, then the the commission's resolution will not be able to continue to be in effect. So it can only stay in effect to the extent that state law enables virtual meetings. In the virtual meeting arena, there are many different parts of the Brown Act that had to be amended in order to enable what we've been doing in the past. Some of it was related to allowing the public to participate. Some of it was related to allowing the legislative body to hold its meetings virtually. Another part of it is a section in the Brown Act that requires that a quorum be in the same physical space, even during virtual meetings. That part was amended in the Brown Act. And there's even another portion of the Brown Act that says that it didn't include internet-based teleconferencing. So it had to be amended to allow internet-based teleconferencing. The other part of it was it required that for every location that the members of the legislative body were at, that location also had to be available to the public. So imagine all your homes suddenly being available to the public because the Brown Act required it. So those are, just to summarize, some of the amendments that we've been working with in the last 14 months for the Brown Act. So I don't know what shape it's going to be in after September. So what we've done in the interim is we already started a process to pull together a work group of neighborhood council leaders. The first set of recruitment will come from the commissioners themselves, 2 individuals that they'll recommend to us. I will be chairing that work group. I just sent out a call for some support for the work group. We'll be staffing it as the department. Once we see the names that are recommended to us by the commission, we'll be looking at those names to see how we need to expand those 14 names. So there are 7 recommended from the commission, and I don't expect the work group to be larger than 23 or 24 people. I want to keep it at a very manageable level, just a true work group. So it's not a legislative body, so the meetings would not be open to the public, and they aren't necessarily, we're not expecting, they will be virtual meetings, but by virtue of the pandemic still being in effect. We expect the work group to meet for about 4 times. So it's going to be a very accelerated, very focused group of individuals that will be willing to work dependently in order to try to come up with the design of a hybrid system for the neighborhood councils. It's not so easy to do as one would think. So just let me give you an example, and I'm sure you have all contemplated this. The logistical pieces to what kind of equipment to have in your physical facilities and all that kind of stuff, that's the easier part. Figuring out how many microphones you might need, or what kind of screen you need, or what kind of audio system. To me, that's just like an event. You just know what kind of size of your room. You've got to have the dimensions for that. That's where the consideration comes in. But the technology to be able to connect those people to who's in the audience in a Brown Act environment using parliamentary procedures is a whole nother ballgame. So just to use yourself, if I may, Ms. Hart, as an example, if you were to have people physically in a room where you had your meeting and you had Zoom going on, well, the blue hand tells you who raised their hand first to speak on Zoom. But if you've got somebody physically standing in front of you at a microphone, who goes first? Who decides who goes first? And how do you ensure transparent and public so that there can be no question about why you called on one person versus another person. The technology doesn't exist to do that. So we've had conversations with the Zoom Corporation about that back in December. I don't know that they're going to be changing any of the functionality to meet our needs, but we're having conversations to see what might happen. So the protocols and the settings and all of that is the bigger issue with hybrid meetings, and that's not unique to the neighborhood council system. That's actually all legislative bodies throughout the state will be faced with that when they have discussions about virtual meetings. In some cases, they've just said, "No, forget, we're just going to do in person." In other cases, cities, I've been following what cities have been doing, they've decided we're just going to stick to all virtual. So if they're making those decisions that way, as let's just keep it one way or another, is because there's an acknowledgement that hybrid is complex and it's not as easy as it may seem. And those are jurisdictions that have staff to really pull together the infrastructure behind it based on whatever decisions they make. You don't have all of that available to you. You're volunteers and you're trying to do the best that you can. And you don't want everybody screaming and yelling at you more than perhaps they already do, because you're just trying to do a yeoman's job, which you always do. So the work group will be coming up with some design that we think can provide some uniformity. We are concerned about equity. We are concerned about all neighborhood councils being as functional as possible. In the past 14 months, some neighborhood councils never did master virtual governance, and it's been a challenge for them. We have board members that participate by phone only. You can imagine trying to see all of the documents that you're reading on your phone. And in some cases, that's been more of a challenge than one would imagine. So we're going to continue to see what happens in that regard. So those are the answers to that part of your question. Are there any parts of that that you would like me to elaborate on?
Well, actually, so you didn't touch on the thing that I was actually most interested in, and I'm a little worried because I think we only have you for 9 more minutes.
Okay.
So let me ask, so I was asking about the resources in terms of, because I know there were a lot of positions on hold and you were limited in terms of your hiring, and you also were limited in your ability to support neighborhood councils and alliances, partly because there was so much COVID related work.
Right.
So, and let me ask my other question, and I hope we can get to folks in the on the call. I know that we did have a chief sustainability officer. I don't know if we have one now because our liaison was the chief sustainability officer. So I'd love an update about who that is and what work Dunn is doing to help implement LA's Green New Deal.
Mm-hmm. So we don't have a chief sustainability officer in the department. Now that the hiring freeze has been lifted for the city, we expect to be able to fill 2 vacant positions of neighborhood empowerment advocates. We're, as a leadership team, having some strategic planning discussions now, and we have to figure out how we continue to support the work of the Green New Deal. And then also there are a couple of other projects like our Ignite program for leadership development for women, as well as our civic youth programming also does not have an assigned neighborhood empowerment advocate to it. I attend most of all the Alliance meetings, and I'm happy to continue to attend your meetings. So just keep me on your list, and I'll attend your meetings as frequently as I possibly can. The NEAs are averaging 8 to 9 neighborhood councils each. So adding alliances, which is not part of our core mission, is a little bit of a challenge for them. So I'm trying to pick up the ball with that, and will be basically your liaison until we are able to make some decisions about who to assign that to. It's a little tough right now to keep adding to their workload right now. When we hire the additional 2 people, and we have to fill we're going to be able to hire Semi's position. So that's going to be a big load. Also to try to help distribute that'll be helpful too. When Betty left the department, she retired using the SIP program. So her position was actually eliminated from our department. So we're not going to be able to fill that position. All departments who had people opt for the SIP program, the separation incentive program, those positions were cut from their department. So unlike a vacancy where it was on hold, if you had an SIP position, they were eliminated from your department. So we're going to have to beg next fiscal year to see if we can have that position returned to us, but that would be 18 months from now, after the next fiscal year cycle, budget cycle.
Okay, thank you. Joanne, go ahead.
Okay, quick comment. There's an equity issue in meeting in person that we discovered at our neighborhood council that I just wanted to bring to your attention, and then I'll have a question. And that is for women. We suddenly have a lot more women on our board, which we were never able to attract because we met at Valley College. And sometimes it was there were no students on the campus, and people had to walk to a distant parking lot alone. And if they couldn't, make friends with someone to walk with them, they resisted being on our board. Suddenly we get a lot of women since it's virtual. So I just want to point that out, that some neighborhood councils don't have good meeting places. I've been on this board for 7 years, and we have looked high and low for places to meet. And we can find places that are safe for committee meetings in a restaurant that's not so busy, but not good for a big board meeting. And then my question has to do with your position on the bylaws for the various neighborhood councils. Do you think that it's moving in a direction of one size fits all, because the neighborhood councils are so diverse and their issues so different that it seems to me that it would be a mistake to go in that direction? But I wanted to hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you for the question. So to the first question related to the security concerns that people have returning to in-person meetings, that's a big factor right now because of the condition that the country is in. There's a lot of stuff that's happening. We're already hearing people express concerns about returning to in-person meetings and what they might feel is the potential for hostile environments, especially if they had hostile conditions virtually. They're concerned about in-person meetings kind of making that a little bit more challenging. But I do understand the issue for women in terms of their safety, separate and apart from the condition of the country, but just because women experience things differently than men do oftentimes. So I'm pretty much aware of that. And previous job working on transportation studies, that was a big factor for women who had to walk to bus stops. That wasn't their sense of security about walking to bus stops in order to take rapid transit. It comes up statistically quite a bit. So it doesn't surprise me that you had a change in that experience, and we will continue to try to be sensitive to that point, and I'm glad that you raised it. As it relates to bylaws, here's what we're going to do related to bylaws. Now, I don't know if your question is your question related to the council motion introduced by Councilmember Rodriguez on 210407?
Yeah, my NC opposed it. Yeah, my neighborhood council opposed it.
Yeah, okay. So what I will do is answer your question in two ways. The first is to let you know what we're going to be doing as a department as it relates to bylaws. And that is, we just finished doing an update to the bylaws template for neighborhood councils. As you know, the department has a template, and our strategy is there are many changes to the bylaws template. We want to circulate that template out to neighborhood councils, explain what changes we put into the template. Some of it was just organizational, so that they kind of flowed a little bit differently. And that was on the advice of some neighborhood council leaders, so that we could separate the items or clearly identify the items that are mandated and from those where neighborhood councils have flexibility. We don't have an interest as a department in bringing uniformity to all parts of the bylaws. We appreciate and respect why there has to be a lot of space for individuality in that process. We would be looking for uniformity around things like the grievance section in the bylaws, because there's a grievance ordinance that supersedes bylaws anyway. So we want to make sure that the template is reflective of the ordinance. And right now the template is not reflective of the ordinance. The template was created in 2014 and the grievance ordinance was adopted in something like 2016. So we think there should be uniformity about those kinds of things in your bylaws. We also think that there are many neighborhood councils that have a lot of parliamentary language in your bylaws. We recommend not having that in your bylaws, especially if you already determine that you follow Robert's Rules of Orders, or in some cases Rosenberg, most are with Robert's Rules. You don't need to have parliamentary language in your bylaws, and actually you oughtn't to have parliamentary language in your bylaws. Now, there might be a reason why a neighborhood council chose to do that I'm not aware of, but those are things that we are going to be looking at in terms of areas of uniformity that we think are important. There are some crazy things in bylaws where the neighborhood councils themselves don't understand what's in their bylaws or why it's in their bylaws. So we might be flagging some things for a specific neighborhood council that, in our experience working with them, and they with themselves are finding some areas of ambiguity in their bylaws that we will be recommending that they address. But our approach is going to be to offer some solid recommendations to neighborhood councils in hopes that our recommendations will be well received and that you decide that you would, voluntarily want to make those changes to your bylaws. That's the process that we are going to proceed with. Now, as it relates to Council File 210407, introduced by Councilmember Rodriguez following the elections, the actual report that has to be submitted by city clerk, city attorney, and Empower LA is a request for information. So we understand that the preamble to the council motion was concerning for neighborhood councils, and we understand why it was concerning for neighborhood councils. But what we've been asked to do in that report, in that council file, is to provide information. We have to do an analysis of bylaws. So we are going to come back with an objective report that speaks to what we were asked to do, and see what direction the council or committee, if we have to go to the APEN committee first before going to city council, we'll see what direction they would like to take at that point.
Okay, thank you, Raquel. It's after 7. We have a tight timeline. I don't know if you can stay with us. I know we have 3 raised hands, so I don't know if you
I have more time. They just texted me that it's okay, so we're okay here.
Okay, so let's try to be quick because we need to move forward, but I'd love to be able to get to these 3 raised hands.
Zoning codes and things like that.
John and Michelle?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for attending today. It's excellent. This is our 71st Zoom meeting that we've gone to, various neighborhood councils. It's for our search for the Holy Grail. We haven't found it yet, but we're on track to find it. But we pick up bits and pieces. Last week, we were in the Palms meeting, and they discussed a council file 12-0460-54. S4, I'm sorry. 120460S4, 700 to 900 pages. The sum of it, from what we understand, is in regards to the Brown Act. What this file is looking for is reducing or quote unquote eliminating neighborhood council input on plum committee decisions that they want to be
effective environment, the zoning.
Yeah, and effective the environment, zoning, etc. So we heard that and scratched our head, and then we saw you were going to be here today. I don't want you going on a lengthy discussion, but are you familiar with that, City Council?
No, I'm not, but I'm happy to look into it and
Okay.
And then get back to you. Could you repeat it for me, please?
Sure, that's 12-0460S4.
Okay.
And
I'm happy to look into it and read.
excellent, because that reduces the input from neighborhood councils, and it was discussed that it could be eliminated. So with all the plum committee decisions, what they're suggesting ahead in that direction is that they're not going to rely on input from the neighborhood councils.
And they filed a CIS in Palms.
Yeah, the CIS was filed by Palms. Thank you.
No, you're welcome. Thank you.
Liz, go ahead.
Thank you, Raquel, for bringing
How are
up.
you?
I'm hanging in. But I thank you very much for bringing up the hostile conditions issue, which has increased exponentially over the previous 4 years, where limits on self-control were ignored, and it has to be addressed across the country, but especially in our meetings. However, I'd like to address two other issues. One is the time and pollution from having people travel across the city to meetings. And I found, I personally really appreciated the fact that we could move to online meetings, because especially in my situation of citywide meetings, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And the second issue is another equity one, which is the cost of childcare for people of limited means, which ties into what Joanne said, but it's also a big, big deal. And yes, we have kids in the background now, but at least people are able to be involved. Can you speak to either of those or both?
Well, as a person that has a 9-year-old to be thinking about, that's been a blessing for me. I've been able to be more accessible in many ways to the neighborhood councils because of virtual meetings. So I appreciate the value of it. We just, hybrid to me means that you give people the option. So if we can create a good system, we're not advocating for or against one or the other. We think hybrid is the way to go, but we need to help neighborhood councils get there. And that's the approach that we're taking. We were very quick to create empowered virtual governance. We did that in less than 30 days. We had to take a pause, ask neighborhood councils to take a pause in having their meetings so that we could do that. But it was important for us to kind of take a step back. We were also moving to virtual management of the department at the same time. All of the staff was trying to figure out what to do with their children at the same time. It was just too much for all of us to do all at once. So neighborhood councils were very gracious and patient with us, and we made a promise to get virtual meeting a governance structure by May 1st, and we did that, and you guys have done a phenomenal job since then. But this hybrid piece, I don't want to do something like that again. I want to do something that includes neighborhood councils in that process. I think it was okay a year ago. It was a declared emergency, a global pandemic, but moving forward, I think neighborhood councils have to be a part of the process, and that's what we are engaging in.
All right, thank you. And Melanie, and I'm sorry, Melanie's is going to be the last one because we do need to move on. So Melanie, go for it.
Thank you, Raquel. Thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate all the work that you've done to facilitate virtual meetings, and for some of the same and some different reasons than others. I'm very supportive of continuing the virtual platform. Hybrid, perhaps for us, our meeting space is on a studio lot that is locked down. That takes an hour to get into. So it's very off-putting for most people to participate at all. And it's only the same people come, so it's been a very exclusionary situation for us. So I'm very, very hopeful that we can continue virtually meeting or go to virtual, but go to hybrid, but virtual, yes. My question, though, specifically to you, was with respect to the neighborhood councils were supposed to all have resilience officers, according to the mayor's office, and there was a directive or a encouragement for all neighborhood councils to develop local resilience/preparedness plans by the end of 2019. Our neighborhood council never did that. I was wondering if you had any idea how many neighborhood councils were able to accomplish that, and if there was an intention to pick that up and continue to move it forward, and if there would be a support system for that, or if that was just on pause given everything.
So I'm going to be meeting with Carolyn this week from Emergency Management Department. Avram has left by now as the General Manager for Emergency Management Department, and we were working in partnership with them and the Mayor's office around the resilience plans. Some of that was put on hold. Some of it kind of shifted to being administered virtually to the extent possible. I don't know how many neighborhood councils actually adopted resilience plans. And I think everything is starting to get resurrected again. Kind of all the projects that were in progress at the time of the pandemic are starting to come back. I've got meetings set up in a variety of spaces where departments are starting to call us again and trying to resurrect projects. So I think it's going to be an experience for us to try to pull all these things back together. But a lot of that work might continue to be done virtually in terms of some of the plan development, some of what was available before. I think there's a lot of interest to do that. Some of those workshops and trainings didn't require the Brown Act, so it's easier. I think you'll be seeing a lot of stuff that's happening virtually now that we've all mastered Zoom. I think there's a willingness to continue to have some discussions on a virtual level. So we will stay in touch with you and let you know how that is progressing.
I really appreciate that. I think it's an important thing to happen. I just don't sense that very many councils did. It would be great to be able to do some trainings and get that going again. Thank you.
I'm trying to raise some money to be able to hire people, either a consultant or a staff member. I would like to have a written emergency preparedness, emergency response plan for the neighborhood council system that's integrated, that is looking at the space that all neighborhood councils occupy in that conversation, because they all sit in that equation quite differently, which is different than resilience. But I think that I would really like to have formal plans for the neighborhood council system that kind of can get down to a neighborhood level, so we can really see what kind of resources neighborhoods need in order to be able to advance these plans, which is lacking.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Melanie. And thank you so much, Raquel, for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And we look forward to having you join us in the near future.
I'm happy to do that. I can come at least attend every month. Just send it to me and I'll try to come every month. And you don't have to have me as a speaker. I can just kind of be a fly in the wall and respond to questions as they come up as best I can.
Oh, that would be, yeah, I would love that. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, everybody.
Bye.
Here.
All right. Scott, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, sounds good. So Lisa, help me out. We're going next to bylaws, and then we'll go to the AB 1401.
Yes, and I'll start off the AB 1401 conversation.
Okay. All right. So, I guess it must be 3 months ago, I think, we had an initial conversation about the work that the steering board has been doing around revising our bylaws. We talked about a few sections of the bylaws that we had worked on at that point, and we got some great feedback on you and a lot of support for the shifts that we were envisioning. So thank you so much. We've been continuing that work, and we wanted to share a bit more with you tonight and get some feedback. Again, this is a work in progress, but as our most active stakeholders, we want you to have a say in how we move forward on these important matters. I will share my screen, and let me just try to find. Sorry, here we go. Okay, so I'm gonna try to give you. You can. This is a very, as you can kind of see our work here. Lots of hands in this on the steering board. I'm going to kind of give you the cliff notes and kind of pull out what I think are the most important shifts, and then we can have some time for you to give us feedback. This is a working document of the bylaws. So last time around we talked about how membership is defined. We talked about representation of the member neighborhood councils. We talked about, so I think that's kind of where we got. And
Scott, if it's helpful,
yes.
I have a document that summarizes the things I was hoping we would talk about today.
Yeah, that's fine. So let's talk about kind of the big shifts. Do you want to pull that up? Lisa?
Yeah, let me try to bear with me. It's a little hard because I'm okay.
And we talked importantly last time about what that voting body would look like for policy making. That's kind of where we left off. So I'm going to start by talking. So we've amended the section that talks about our steering board a bit.
Okay, I can't easily get to that document right now. I did send it to you.
Yeah.
If you're able to get to it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can keep trying. It's just a little hard. Maybe I should try to, it's a little hard because I'm recording. I haven't restricted. But yeah.
So one of the things that we want to do is kind of open up the process around becoming a steering board member a bit. So we're planning to move that to an application process. We are interested in expanding our board. So we want to make sure, folks that are engaged in this space know how to get more involved. And so our plan is to align the terms of the steering board with the election cycle for neighborhood councils that most neighborhood councils follow, that 2-year cycle that we're just kind of starting right now. And we're planning to implement an application process to grow our board and to get new folks engaged. So that's a bit of a shift. And let me see.
So, okay, so I can't share it with you, but I pulled up the document that I sent. One of the things we wanted to be really clear about, based on your feedback, I think we've talked about this a little bit, but we did decide, just to be clear, to follow your recommendations, and we'll ask each neighborhood council to have up to 3 representatives. That would be a primary representative, and then 2 alternate representatives.
Right.
So I just wanted to share that. And then we have a bunch of things regarding committees that we, that some folks on the board, I should say, are proposing.
Yeah, so that's a good point, Lisa. And that, as Lisa alludes to, that came right out of your feedback. This last round a few months ago, when we talked about these proposed revisions, I think we heard from a lot of folks that, there was an interest in having equal voting representation for each neighborhood council that joins the NCSA. So we took that feedback and we wanted to sort of allow other people to engage. So we're proposing this system of having 1 voting rep and 2 alternative voting reps.
So another thing, I'll just read from my bullet points. These things are some of these things are buried in this bylaws and some are not. There's been some discussion about making sure that the committee chairs are reappointed every 2 years. That's one point. Another suggestion, this is already in our committee guidelines, but folks thought that we should be more explicit, that the committee chair and board liaison can remove a committee member. We've actually never had to do that, but that is in our committee guidelines and people think it should be in our bylaws. Another suggestion.
Wait, Lisa?
Yes, go ahead.
So are you reporting back on feedback when you've reached out to the committees in the last week? I'm just a little bit confused.
No, this is the recommendations from the board that I summarized into a document that I unfortunately can't pull up.
Oh, okay. So where is that removal policy of a committee member? I don't know that that's in the.
It's not in the. It's in our committee guidelines. It's not in our draft, but we said in our last meeting that it should be added to our draft.
I see. Okay.
Another suggestion by some on the board is that the board appoints committee members. So that's one I think we should talk about. And then there are some suggestions regarding the process, and this is in this document, letter G, I think, or maybe it's a little lower, that the way committees bring things to the board be a little bit more codified and formalized with there are certain with certain requirements regarding the reporting and et cetera, that maybe we should talk about. And then there's a thought that we should, and I don't know if this should be in the bylaws or not, but there's a thought that we should ask each committee to create a mission statement or a charter that would then be approved by the board.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I think this Article 8, has some of the meatiest suggestions for shifts to our governance. So yeah, so as Lisa said, one piece is we just want to make sure that the folks like you that are engaged in this work know that this is a living organization and that, the series of committees and issues that we're working on in this moment doesn't have to be exhaustive. So we wanted to kind of build in structures to allow for that ingenuity, to allow for that entrepreneurship. So, that's part of what we're trying to sort of codify in our bylaws and in Article 8, Sections 8A and B, that we would reauthorize committees, that we would take proposals for new committees. That's an effort to engage all the voices involved in this organization. And then Lisa is right that a sizable shift that is suggested in this in the revision of the bylaws that you're seeing in this document is that the steering board would appoint committee members, the chairs and the members of the committee for voting purposes. That's not to say that anybody who would want to attend a committee wouldn't be able to do so and give commentary, but the notion is that the steering board would appoint voting members of the committees. And that third shift that I think Lisa alluded to was around sort of, trying to support this shift towards the committees, preparing recommendations for this voting body to weigh in on. And we want to be a little bit offhands with how the committees get those recommendations, but we want a certain number of things to come to the steering board to include, which would include a voting tally. So like if you are working on a non-controversial item and you're working by consensus, great, fantastic. But take a vote tally at the end so we know who voted for or against the proposal, and also to make sure that minority people in the minority opinion are represented and feel comfortable sharing their opinion on the matter as well. So those are a few of the shifts, and we're excited to hear your thoughts, responses, questions. Anyone, raise your hand. I'll stop sharing my screen. Any questions for class? Okay, we've got Glenn Bailey.
Ready?
Yeah, we can hear you, Glenn.
Thanks. So I heard an alignment, as I understood correctly, to correspond with the neighborhood council elections.
Right.
But, the devil is in the details, because some of the regions, and it can vary depending on how the city clerk implements the regional order. So some neighborhood councils are not. Oh, and the other thing is that the department issued a board seating policy this year that was optional, but it will be mandatory in 2023. That will require that all boards, all newly elected board members will be seated on July 1st. However, the actual meeting at which the board gets any business done would be sometime between the 1st and 4th week of July. And given the July 4th holiday, some don't meet in July. And then then maybe that takes you to August. I don't know. Have you thought about that in terms of the specifics on that? Because I know the budget advocates went to an off year. In other words, they specifically chose it not to be a year where the neighborhood council elections were not being held. And then just a quick question. I looked at the NCSA website and I'm not seeing even the existing bylaws there. So I'm not sure where they are that one can access them, but if there's a link you can put into chat, that would be helpful. Thank you.
They're there, they're under get involved. Like if you go to like the first, I think they're in like first or second line, there's a link to them. I'm trying to get on another screen so I can contribute to the chat, but I can't do that right now.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks.
I'll take a look. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Glenn. Yeah, I mean, I think your point is well taken that the devil is in the details. I think that shift that you're talking about towards, in the future, all neighborhood councils being seated at the same time is going to be helpful with this proposed bylaws shift, because the idea is that, okay, you got a whole new generation of board members coming on neighborhood councils throughout the city. Let's get them involved, right? And let's make sure that they know how to get involved in the NCSA once they've been sworn in. So the notion would be, after that happens, then we have a series of actions, including reauthorizing our committees or creating new committees, appointing folks to committees. And, in the future, we're really interested in, people easily being able to access that system. So that's kind of the idea here. Definitely, needs to be a lot more thinking about how this is implemented. And like I said, it's a work in progress. Dan Cagle.
Hi, I just have to say that the changes described here are somewhat overwhelming, and there needs to be I suppose, a clear description of them distributed in writing so people can wrap their heads around it a bit.
I did send it to all the committees, including the Energy Committee, but I don't know, I might be able to share it from this other computer, but I'm sorry, I'm multitasking right now. So I think all the committees have seen a summary of the changes we wanted to talk about today.
Oh, I saw the summary. I'm talking about the actual changes.
Okay, well, those are not done, so they're not really ready for prime time.
I see. Well, showing them tonight was somewhat confusing. I mean, so.
Yes.
Yeah, fair. That's fair. That's fair. Perhaps it would have made sense to just talk about those major shifts rather than showing you that very somewhat confusing document. Fair enough. Ji-Young? Ji-Young, are you there?
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yeah, I also would like to see the proposed changes. And I am generally not in favor of appointments. And that's all.
Appointments of committee members, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, in the state Democratic Party, there's a lot of just contention around the chair basically appointing all of the committee members. And although the chair did include other officers in the decision making this time around, it just tends to be very anti-democratic.
If I can chime in for just a second, because I had the benefit of being a part of the board discussion. I think, Scott, when we talked about this shift, we talked about this appointment really being an affirmation of a recommendation that would come from like the committee chair and members of the committee, right? So we just wanted to have a process where there was some level of acknowledgement for who the committee members actually are, so that it isn't just random folks that come in and maybe one day they want to influence the vote on a particular issue, and all of a sudden you have 50 or 100 new people show up that were never part of the NCSA or the Sustainability Alliance, and usurp that vote and that position of the NCSA. How do we create a system that is fair to folks, but that also builds in that level of credibility and creates that public trust? So when the conversation that I was a part of was the recommendation would come from like the committee chair and the committee members. Is that something that changed, Scott or Lisa?
No, I mean, I agree with the spirit of what you're saying. I mean, thank you, Ernie. I think the idea is is not to exclude anyone. That's not the intention at all. The idea is to just, as you say, sort of codify who are those active members that are coming regularly, that want to be voting members of the committee. You know, can we formalize that just a bit? Since these, recommendations coming out of committee are now high stakes, they're going to this voting body, they're going to decide the views of this organization. That's kind of the notion, not to exclude anybody that would be participating regularly in the committees, and not to impose some sort of ideological view from the steering board on individual committees either.
Yeah, and I think the other part of it is to also help empower the committees, because if the idea here is to create a process where if a committee puts forward a recommendation to the board so that it can come before the body, then there should be a process for that, right? And this helps to build the merits of that process. That's all.
Thanks, Ernie. Stacy, sure.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Lisa. My concern is that there are, as we all know, on neighborhood councils, a few people who carry the heavy work. I myself am the representative to probably 3 or 4 different alliances, as well as plum chair and first vice president, while holding outside offices. And what we've seen in another alliance where they had changed the bylaws and the procedures and became, I'm going to use the word militant because it applied to them, but it might not apply here. When you made it that there might be punitive action that became taken against someone, or you made it more difficult to encourage participation of people who are volunteers and unpaid and doing some of the heavy lifting for their community, that we stopped having as much attendance. I just want to be cognizant of the fact that, as Lisa knows, we had this working group and we got a lot done, and it was very hard to schedule meetings because all of us were heavy lifters at our NCs. And I want to make us aware that volunteerism and the time devotion that we have and the number of alliances and affiliations that people are working on, we don't want to discourage participation, and we don't want to discourage other voices, because we do discuss controversial issues, but we also serve a purpose of helping to inform NC members that might not be as familiar with the issues that we discuss until they actually show up. So I just want to be cognizant of the fact that we have to be sensitive, that when people volunteer their time, we kind of have to soft handle making sure they stay and they get invested and they stick around. There aren't punitive measures and they feel welcome, and we want to encourage that engagement, not discourage it. That's my only contribution from somebody who does a lot of lifting, and I'm hoping a lot new people will come in and they'll stick around. I think you do good work here, and I want to see that continue. Thanks for your efforts on this.
Thank you, Stacy. We honor your service, and yes, I can assure you the intention of all of these governance changes is to expand the field and get more people engaged, and certainly keep the folks that are already engaged as well. Any other questions or thoughts? Okay, I'm seeing somebody who's calling in by phone with an 818 number. 818-761.
Hi, this is Diana Nicole.
Hi.
Hey there. I just want to say, I was involved with the NCSA. I was a committee chair for over a year, and I've been involved with the Trees Committee pretty much since its inception. So I forget, I've lost track of the number of years. I stepped down as a committee chair in partly due to a controlling board member who is still on the steering committee now. So when I hear some of these bylaws that puts a lot of control back onto the board, it makes me very uncomfortable considering what I went through as a committee chair. So I just want to put that out there for everyone to listen to, and who may have not been a committee chair or on a committee at the NCSA all these years, but that was my experience. So like I said, it just starts to make me queasy when I hear some of the things that you're proposing here. And, you know, in terms of what the last caller, the last person who's joining this mission, joining this meeting, sorry, just said, I would also agree with her that, you know, it's hard to get volunteers as it is. And when you start to put out a lot of impediments, it, you know, may make other people feel uncomfortable as well. So I appreciate you listening to my feedback on that.
Appreciate the feedback. Thank you. Helen Toko.
Hi. So I just had a couple of comments and thoughts, and just want to recognize that I'm fairly new here to the NCSA, and I've been involved with the Trees Committee for the last couple of months. Thank you to Joanne for letting me hop in and learn from you with that. You know, I'm looking at the proposed changes here, and I just have a couple of kind of clarifying thoughts and questions, and I see some of those were in the chat as well. But one comment I had was just to make sure, you know, I see that we're talking about reappointing committee chairs every 2 years, and I see the logic behind that, but I also want to make sure that we're not kind of setting that as like some kind of term limit, and that, you know, as we're discussing, it is difficult to get chairs and, you know, members and volunteers to take on the heavy lift, and that we're not kind of, you know, setting an arbitrary length of that term.
Can I interrupt you just for a second, Helen? Because I can address that. We actually, in our draft, it explicitly says we are not recommending any term limits.
Oh, great. Okay. I was not aware of that. And then also just kind of echoing the comment in the chat of making sure it's clear kind of what the expectation is to become a committee member, and you know, what that process looks like, but what you have to do to become eligible. Because I can honestly say I've been involved with the Trees Committee, but I'm not even entirely sure if I'm currently a member or if I just go to the committee meeting. So it would be great to kind of understand like what the expectations are.
Awesome. Yeah. And that's, you know, that's part of what we're trying to address, Helen. We want a little bit more, you know, certainty and clarity for folks about the process. Okay. Well, I think that this has been really, really useful. I see more folks coming on. Let's just take, I know we have more business. We have the parking minimum stuff to get to. So let's take Joanne and Shelley, and then we'll move on. And, you know, after we take those two public comments, please let us, if you haven't had a chance to talk tonight and you still want to give feedback, you know, email the steering board, email Lisa, email myself. And we will be continuing to talk about this and then planning to bring a more formal set of revised bylaws to you for review. Joanne.
Oh, I just wanted to say that the Trees Committee started out extremely small, and we realized that to do the kind of work that we wanted to do to preserve trees, that it needed to become as large as possible. And at the beginning of this year, I announced at an NCSA meeting that we were going to enlarge. And we were going to make the Trees Committee very open because we felt that there was so much to learn about what one can do in the city to save trees. And so it's really less about policy than it is about education and interacting with the city structure when it comes to trees. So what what works for one committee may not work for another committee, but for our committee, this is what I did. And what I've done is someone emails me and says, you know, I don't really want to be an official member of the committee. I would like to hear about your programs. Then I blind copy them when I send out notices so that they don't get involved in conversations, and I don't consider them a committee member. When we had this most recent vote, I would say approximately half of the people that I have on the mailing list voted. And so people are active in their own way. Our members came about mainly either because they were challenging a tree removal and then decided to join forces with us, or because they just emailed the NCSA and said, I want to be on the trees committee, either to Lisa or to me. So that's how we got, and I actually have not met most of the people because so much of this has been virtual. All of it has been virtual. We were virtual since the beginning. So our meetings were on Skype initially. So we occasionally meet each other at a forum, an NCSA forum when they were in person, or we run into each other at the Congress. But it's not been really a design. It's been an effort to just really embrace the idea of tree sustainability in the city, in this very large city. So I don't really look to narrowing it down unless I'm forced to, you know. It's just a philosophical thing that I you know, subscribe to, and the more the merrier kind of thing. So I don't really, and I don't, in general, trees are not terribly controversial. You can get into different aspects that can create some controversy, but you know, most people, there's seldom a person that says, I hate trees. So that's just my statement.
Thank you, Joanne. Shelley.
Thank you. So as a past board member of the NCSA and liaison for the Trees Committee, I guess my biggest question mark is about appointing committee chairs. And I'll speak to my experience with the Trees Committee, since that's the one that I've been involved with since literally the day that Joanne created it at the NCSA, the big meeting with Laura Mack. So I'm trying to kind of put this on for size and imagine, how would that work? Let's say these bylaws are approved, voted on and approved. You know, who is the board going to, what pool is the board going to appoint from? Is there anyone actually who's willing to even step up and do all of the work that Joanne does? And it's not simple work. I mean, it's taken myself and Joanne and many others many years to understand all of the intricacies of the departments that touch trees and who to talk to and what to do and what works and what doesn't, and the different policies. It may sound simple, but it really isn't. So I'm thinking, like, how are you going to appoint someone who does not have the experience and the depth of knowledge? So what are the criteria going to be for appointing someone? And I'm assuming that if this happens, it wouldn't be retroactive. You wouldn't appoint someone immediately. You'd start with the existing chairs and then give at least 2 years to think about someone new. So I have more questions than answers about this, and I just don't really see the reasoning behind it. You know, it seems to me like nothing is broken now, so I'm not quite sure that I'm convinced what this is about. And maybe you can clarify.
So lots of good feedback there. Thank you. Some of my fellow steering board members may have reactions as well. I mean, I think I think the points about, that it's hard to get folks to volunteer. I hear you. As somebody who's served on my board for eight years and chair for 6.5 years, I understand the value of sustained leadership. At the same time, my personal experience has been a little bit contrary to what you're talking about, in terms of, we've had at Mid-City West, where I was the chair, had a lot of new people come into the process during my term as chair. A lot of new people, and a lot of new people bring a lot of wonderful new ideas. That's not taking away from any of the sustained leaders, but I think our intention is to how can we build structures to engage new stakeholders, to engage the number of voices around the table in this space. So I think that is part of the intention, not at the exclusion of folks, but we do want to draw the circle as wide as we can and get more folks engaged with the work. But I maybe Lisa or
I
Ernie
agree with
might
that,
have something
actually.
to add.
I actually agree with that, but then you could have, if people step up that are interested in chairing, you could have the committee vote for them. But to have an appointment, kind of in a vacuum when you don't have, multiple interested parties seems a little odd.
Yeah, Shelley, that's something that I commented on earlier, that the discussion I was involved in, part of the process is that you'd have the committee put forward these recommendations for the board, and the board's vote would be more affirmative, but it would also provide a level of credibility in formally recognizing who these members are, who the committee chair is, and because sometimes, and you know this, Shelley, there have been questions about the credibility of the organization and how decisions are made and who really are representative of neighborhood councils. And so there really needs to be a process that helps to address those questions and has a level of credibility and checks and balances. And that's the idea of what's being put forward right now. It's also open to feedback. So if you could provide feedback in that spirit, that would be very helpful.
I guess the only thing I would say is you have to think about what happens if you don't have enough interested potential chairs. What happens then?
Well, then probably you appoint the person that's interested.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
You don't know until you ask.
I think typically the idea is we would start with, maybe the existing chair going into that next term, right? And why would that change if everything's working well, right? The idea would be to continue that perhaps, or maybe there's an opportunity to offer someone else the opportunity to step up and lead as well. That's, at some point you have to reevaluate these decisions. And I think that applies even to the steering committee members, right? There has to be a level there of accountability and checks and balances, and in ourselves operating as an organization that is sustainable for the long run and not just built around one person or an individual, right?
Agreed. And I was actually going to ask also, what are the term, I hate the word term limits, but what are the timelines, I'll say, for the steering board members?
The notion is that they would serve 2-year terms as well.
So that's been in the bylaws for a long time, but it hasn't actually been implemented.
Right, fair enough. And that's part of what we're trying to formalize so that people have expectations. And as I mentioned, we also want to grow the board and help folks understand how they can join the board. I think that's all the time that we...
And just very quickly, we did talk in board discussions about revisiting these our terms as steering board members in October, and we wanted to roll all of this out prior to then. This is something we wanted to accomplish and set up so that the next administration, the next group of leadership, volunteers that step up, have a structure to work with.
Well, this has been really useful. Thank you so much. I think that's all the time we have tonight for that. Again, this is an ongoing discussion. Appreciate your engagement.
Yes, thank you, everybody. I have so many thoughts to share, but there is time and other forums. Okay, so we are moving to parking minimums. I hope you folks are aware that Councilmember Koretz has proposed opposition to Laura Friedman's at the state level motion to not require parking minimums near transit. So this is like a triple negative issue, so it's a little confusing. But I reached out to Laura Friedman's office, and through that connection, was put in touch with Luke Klipp, who I remember from his days in the Los Feliz Neighborhood Council when I was chairing the Silver Lake Neighborhood Council Green Committee. So I see Luke, and I'm gonna, and he does a lot of work on transportation and housing, and I'm gonna open it up to him to give a little spiel.
Lisa?
Yes?
We actually, I mean, before we set this up, we do have a motion from one of our committees opposing Paul Koretz's.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Thank you.
I think that's important to
Yes,
state
you're right.
at the outset, and maybe even get on the floor before we hear some context from Luke.
Sure. Go ahead if you want. Do you want to? Yes, but the Transportation Committee recommended to the board that that we bring this to you for the NCSA to vote to oppose Koretz's motion.
Is anybody from the Transportation Committee here that would like to make that motion on the floor tonight? If not, I can make the motion. If you, okay, Stacy, are you
No.
recognizing?
I have a question before we actually move on this motion. As a plum chair, I'm just questioning why it came solely out of transportation, since it also involves planning and land use issues.
Well, I mean, we're new to this space. We're new to this world of getting recommendations to this voting body. This is only the second or third time that this voting body has actually voted on policy issues. So we don't have any standards for recommendations going to more than one committee. We're just hearing committee motion recommendations that we think the voting body would be interested in and engaged in. So I'm gonna make the motion. Do we have a second on that motion? Ji-Young, are you seconding?
Yeah, I was actually on the Transportation Committee and voted in favor.
Okay, so seconded by Ji-Young, and let's go to Luke to kind of set us up for this now, and then we'll have a public comment period for non-voting members. Then we can have discussion for voting members, and then go to a vote.
Scott, do we need to say what the motion is for folks? Because
yeah, so Paul Koretz wrote a city council resolution to oppose Laura Friedman's AB 1401. AB 1401 is a proposed state bill that would eliminate minimum parking requirements for new housing construction within a half a mile of transit stops. The Koretz motion opposes that state bill. And our motion, the recommendation from our Transportation Committee opposes Paul Koretz's motion. So in essence, our committee recommendation is in essence supporting Laura Friedman's assembly bill. Okay, Luke.
Great, thanks. Good evening, everyone. My name is Luke Klipp. As Lisa mentioned, I was previously on the Los Feliz Neighborhood Council. I served there for 4 years, including 2 as the president. I think my 4 years in the neighborhood council, I affectionately recall as the time when I earned all of my grays, as I'm sure we can all relate to. It's a lot of thankless work, but important work, and I appreciate all of you being here on your Sunday evening for this. So I wrote my master's thesis 15 years ago on the cost effects of parking requirements in new housing. So it's kind of like my bailiwick to think about parking requirements as it relates to housing. And I think there's just a couple things for us to understand here as it relates to what our Assemblymember Laura Friedman's attempting to do. So her bill would eliminate, would take away cities' ability to have parking minimums in new housing construction within a half mile of transit. The bill has been amended so that it only applies in counties with 600,000 or more residents and with cities in those counties with 75,000 or more residents. So it's sort of been whittled down, and in LA County, that basically means there are 25 largest cities out of our 88 cities. The bill would apply to them, which is like 3/4 of the overall population in LA County. And I think there's just a couple things to understand about parking minimums, parking requirements. First and foremost being they're totally arbitrary. You know, you or I may think, well, of course, it makes sense that this type of apartment should have, you know, this much parking, or this kind of house should have this much parking, you know, but literally there's no science behind it. It is one city looks at another city and says, oh, they're doing that, we'll do that here. Or, you know, there was actually an institute that has looked at this question for years and has done totally statistically unverifiable kinds of research on this, and has actually said, cities, please don't use our research as a way to develop your own parking minimums, even though that's what some cities have done. So they're totally arbitrary. And I think what's important within that is they're not only arbitrary, but they're incredibly expensive. So when you look at new housing that gets built here in Los Angeles, what usually ends up happening, if it's like a, you know, let's say a 30 or 40 or 50 unit building, what usually ends up happening, the first thing they do is they dig a big hole in the ground, right? They like fence it all off and they go dig down 20 feet, 30 feet, however much they dig out all of this dirt, tons and tons of dirt, tear it all out, and then pour a bunch of concrete and pour a bunch more concrete, all so that they can meet the parking requirements, right? Because the city says if you're going to build new housing, you have to do all this. That has enormous implications for greenhouse gases, climate change, baking in sort of incentivizing people to drive. There's a study that came out last year that actually was able to look at this question in a really specific way and found that just having that additional parking does mean that people will drive more, that people will be more likely to own a car and be more likely to drive. And, you know, 1401 doesn't say don't provide the parking. It just says you don't get to enforce an arbitrary parking minimum. So I think, you know, that's sort of the first sort of key thing, I think, in all of this. The next is just the cost that it has, the price effects that this has in housing. Not only do parking requirements end up getting in the way of new housing getting built, period, so they actually restrict how much housing we see get built, but then they also make the housing that gets built more expensive. And this is something that's been studied. And they were able to find that if an apartment has one parking space versus that same apartment having no parking space, the parking accounts for about 10 to 15% premium on the rent for that apartment. So in LA, in the city of LA, something like, you know, 500,000 of our residents, they don't even have a car. But we require every single new apartment building to have at least 1.5 parking spaces for every apartment, without any thought given to, you know, the folks who might want to be able to rent an apartment without a car. So, you know, this has, you know, so if we're requiring people, you have to pay for this parking in your rent, or if you're buying a condo or buying a house, you will have to pay for this even if you don't want to use it. So it has this massive implications around cost. And the last thing I would just say, and I appreciated the question that came from one of the board members here about, you know, shouldn't this have maybe also come from the Plum Committee? While I know that this is really all, you know, we're all looking at this as a, you know, a matter of parking, and you know, what should we have, what parking minimums should there be or not, or whatever. For my druthers, this is an affordable housing bill. This is an affordable housing bill, because what we've actually seen, where San Diego did something similar to what AB 1401 would do statewide. They implemented a similar approach just a couple years ago. And while the rest of the state saw a little less new housing get constructed across the state, San Diego saw a huge push up in new housing construction, and particularly in affordable housing construction. as a result of not having these parking minimums, which is not to say that all this new housing was getting built with no parking, but is to say that we don't even know how much of what gets built is because of or is being dictated by what the parking requirements are for that space. And by just getting rid of the parking requirements, that actually incentivized a whole bunch of more affordable housing creation in San Diego when they did this a couple years ago. And it looks like that would be what we would expect to see statewide with this kind of legislation going through. So I'm here in support of your motion, which opposes Paul Koretz's motion, which opposes AB 1401. My goodness, I'm happy to take any questions, and thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you so much, Luke. Very much appreciated. Let's go to our public comment section from non-voting members. So if you're a non-voting member, please raise your hand to be recognized. So I see John and Michael Hales.
Thank you. Very good. The question that I have is there's several projects in Northridge that upon the inception of these projects and getting them approved, there was a lot of discussion about parking spaces per unit. And what we've discovered is, as you pointed out so perfectly, is the cost goes vertical. If you're supposed to have 2 parking spaces, that means the structure that you have must incorporate those 2, so on and so on and so forth. The interesting thing is in all of these projects and going back after completion is the streets feeding these developments are packed with cars out of those units that the people have 2-car garage that covers your, but they're not utilizing the 2-car garage because that's now an ADU and they're utilizing that for income. So they park on the street. So my question is, after calling DOT, the police, etc., who's actually going to follow up with this to make sure that the parking is enforced? Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, I think that's a separate issue from what we're talking about tonight.
Really?
But appreciate the thoughts. Let's go to Faramars.
Oh, off topic.
Hi, thank you. My name is Farah Mares. I'm an LA City resident who does not own a car and rides transit. I've been a transit and cycling advocate for over a decade. Many of you know me. I am passionate about reducing parking and eliminating parking minimums in general. However, AB 1401 could be counterproductive, and I would urge this group not to support it blindly, but rather to press Assemblymember Laura Friedman to make changes to it. Here's why. The impact of AP 1401 will be to make it more attractive for developers to buy existing buildings near transit, evict the residents, and build new market rate housing. According to LA County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, over 70% of its riders are in the extremely low income category relative to AMI, area median income. That means they earn less than 30% of the area median income. So even affordable housing units are not affordable to most Metro Transit riders. What this could do is not only make it more expensive for nonprofit affordable housing developers to build by bidding up the value of the land by market rate developers, but it could also displace existing transit riders. I know that market rate developers like having bonuses near transit. Transit is an amenity to many affluent people looking to live in the city, but we need to think about that trade-off. I know there was a study from the city of San Diego that was cited by Streets Blog, so I want to address that in particular. The reason why the elimination of all parking minimums in San Diego resulted in an increase in affordable housing generation was that the city of San Diego had not eliminated parking requirements for affordable housing. They had incentive where there was a reduced parking requirement. And so eliminating it did help. So what could Assemblymember Friedman do? Assemblymember Friedman could eliminate the parking requirement for all affordable housing projects. That would be a great help. But to eliminate it across the board for market rate and for affordable is going to cause problems. And that's why there's a significant coalition of groups, including the Western Center on Law and Poverty, the Inner City Law Center, the Alliance for Community Transit Los Angeles, San Francisco Tenants Union, Livable California, Physicians for Social Responsibility Los Angeles, among others, that publicly have spoken out that we should not support AB 1401 unless amended. Unfortunately, I have to tell you, I listened to Assemblymember Friedman speak at the Senate Housing Committee this past Thursday, and she did not express any willingness to make any changes. And that the problem, I think, is that it has become so ingrained that we need to do whatever we can to eliminate parking. And believe me, I have been an advocate. Glenn Bailey can vouch for me as a longtime cycling advocate. We need to eliminate parking minima, but we need to do it in a way that interfaces with this affordable housing issue. And I think it would make sense to either start with giving this to affordable housing, or if we do it across the board for all developers, that we enact some protections for existing tenants near these major transit stops. And AB 1401 does neither. That's why I urge that we convey both to Assemblymember Friedman and to Councilmember Koretz. Councilmember Koretz is my council member. I've chewed him out more times than I can shake a stick at on parking, on cycling, on pedestrians. But you know, even a broken clock can be right twice a day. And I think rather than supporting his motion, rather than opposing his motion, I think we need to articulate what we want. That's what I would recommend. Thank you.
Thank you, Fairmers. Okay, Liz Amsden.
Hi. I have concerns about this, and I think that there needs to be a very nuanced approach. I liked a lot of what the previous speaker said. The cost of housing in Los Angeles is so high that developers are moving into these transit areas. They're evicting people in affordable units to build market rate units in many cases with less housing and that are not affordable to the people who've been displaced. Many of the people who move in like being close to transit, but they also have multiple cars, and these cars get parked in the streets, creating other problems. I've lived in many cities and have used public transportation in most of them. And Los Angeles is behind, way behind on the curve to have effective public transportation. And I think it needs to be pushed across the board, on many ways. And at the moment, what I'm seeing is people in my neighborhood, which is in the Northeast, being pushed out of the neighborhood because of the cost, the profit that can be made on the properties. And as a result, they're moving out into the distant suburbs, and the pollution that is being created in their commutes and the greenhouse gases released, I think, is a real problem. And I don't know what the solution is, but I think it needs to be much more nuanced than either Koretz's council file or the state AB, was it 1401? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Kathy Schreiner.
Thank you. I'm a member of the Van Nuys Neighborhood Council, and just from the perspective of Van Nuys, we already have such a problem with parking and more people in units than the parking allows. And as a member of our Plum Committee, every single multifamily project that's been brought to us has taken advantage of transit incentives to reduce the parking. And so even doing that, we're all very concerned because we feel that it'll just lead to more cars on the street to raise the problem. So I think it's just a question of realism and practicality. Plus, I really love the other comments raised about affordable housing and the impact on it. But I just don't think that it really will help us with the way that people live and their desire to have a car, whether they take public transit or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Stacy Greenwald.
There it goes. Okay. Hi, my name is Stacy Greenwald. I was just elected with my slate to the Mar Vista Community Council a couple of weeks ago. And I'm new to this committee. So I just, as a resident, what I wanted to say was that I agree with everything the past couple of people have said. And in fact, I find it a little suspicious. I feel like from the point of view of the environment, it just seems that there are much more major, not manipulative or developer-centric ways to protect the environment. I'm from New York City. I've lived in cities all my life. I feel like the infrastructure for transportation should come first. I don't even know how statistically or sort of data, how you collect data that tells you that the people who if they don't have a parking spot, that they'll actually have less cars or drive less. Because, you know, there's a bus system, we have public transportation and of some kind. And I, for one, could never, live my life if all I had was this public transportation. I would have to have a car. So I just feel like it's fishy. I don't understand why the focus on this kind of thing when, I don't know, you could mandate, electric cars. You could mandate that we, all plant 100 trees. I mean, it just doesn't seem to go very far. And in fact, it just seems to, I believe it's going to cause more problems, in my opinion. Or that the reward may be too small. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. So we're going to go to Holly Tilson and then Christine Mills, and then I'm going to give Luke a chance to respond to some of these comments and questions.
Scott,
and then,
before
I'm
we
sorry?
Scott,
I'm sorry?
Scott, respectfully, before we go back to Luke for questions, I would like a few minutes to address some inaccuracies in what Luke said. It's not to be argumentative, to clarify on some zoning.
Stacy, you're a voting member, and you'll have a chance to do that after our public comment.
Thank you.
You will definitely have a chance to do that. Okay, so Holly, Christine, then we'll go to Luke for some responses to some of these concerns, and then we'll go to discussion by the voting body. Okay, Holly.
Okay, my name's Holly Tilson. I'm on the Mar Vista Community Council. I've been on it since 2016. And I'd just like to give a few real life scenarios that we have in our area. We had 100% affordable housing built on Grandview. When this was presented, I think it's only 54 units. They were using the reduced parking in their plan. And we said to them, well, they claimed the people who live in their units don't have cars. And we said, well, bring us the data from all of your other units and prove to us that they don't have cars. Well, they brought a revised number of parking spots, which was 2 per unit. We had another developer who bought 2 properties. I think it's about, I want to say 125 units using the transit oriented density bonuses. She paid 3.1 million for both properties. She claims she could not put the parking underground. She could not increase the number of slots because she wouldn't be able to make any money. Our council member put some conditions on the property, and lo and behold, she sold these 2 properties 2 years later without doing anything, without changing the parking. The new owner has the same conditions on them, and they purchased it for 13 million. I'm sure they're going to be making money on it. We can do parking studies to see if we need more parking. Our neighborhood association did one on these buildings, which showed about a 30% underparked, which equaled about 3,000 miles a month driving around looking for parking spots. We could build affordable housing or even this transit housing and only offer it to people who don't have driver's license or cars. You know, that would never fly. It's California, Los Angeles especially, we don't have the infrastructure. I could have never ridden. I did ride a bus from Koreatown to UCLA when I first moved to LA. But living in Mar Vista to get to UCLA and work a 12-hour shift, it's just not realistic. And there's plenty of people, you know, even going to some of the conferences offered by the city. If I go to Van Nuys on a weekend, you look at the bus schedule and what they tell you how long it takes to get there. It's 3 hours versus on a Saturday, it's a 20-minute drive. It's unrealistic not to put parking in. It's a giveaway to developers.
Thank you. Okay, so our last non-voting member is Christine Mills.
Hi, thank you, everyone. Thank you for hearing me just for a moment. Luke, Klipp, thank you for being here and thank you for your advocacy on this. I just want to say from my personal experience, I have lived in Los Angeles without a car. Our family is car light. We're in a transit poor area. I'm trying to improve that. But the bottom line is that free parking is essentially subsidizing vehicle ownership. And as long as we continue with a model that is based on vehicle ownership and that every individual has the right to drive where they need to go, that undermines our support of rapid transit. It undermines our support of bus lanes. Like the 5,000 pounds that any person brings with them, whether it's electric or gasoline powered, is a lot of property. And parking for free is something that I feel we have simply subsidized far too long. We have an idea that this is something that we simply deserve, and we don't. It is cost impactful. It is destroying our communities. It takes up, look at the dining, like in places where we've done real like outdoor dining, where that used to be 10 parking spaces is now a beautiful space to sit. We have sacrificed our city and our communities to cars because it's all subsidized, and we think everybody thinks we get a free space and that a car is just a given part of life, and it doesn't need to be that way. And as a sustainability committee, I really hope that we can be leaders on advocating, you know, when we have viable transit and when it's difficult. Like, I don't know how many of you choose to drive into downtown because it's just impossible. So you choose the alternative, which is to hop on public transit, right? Because it's not possible to park downtown, so you don't drive downtown. And that's just how we make change. And it's maybe awkward for some people, but that's the change we need to see, because at the rate our city is growing, we can't possibly afford every single person moving to the city and who needs a home to also have a place to park a large piece of steel. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Okay, so I'm going to go to Luke now for response to some of these concerns, and then we'll start our board discussion.
Thanks, Scott. And I actually would prefer not to describe this as a response, more so that I think hearing what the concerns people were raising from the public who are participating here tonight, there are maybe some things that I just needed to be a little clearer on in my presentation. I appreciate the opportunity to offer a few more comments. So there were a couple folks who asked questions about incentivizing, whether parking is really incentivizing or people are going to really use it. And that if, you know, that especially with market rate housing getting built around transit, people are still going to drive. And I had mentioned that there was a study that came out just a couple of years ago, it may have actually just been last year, that actually had the ability to really kind of look at this question in a very specific way. I'll put a link to it in the chat. But the thing that they found from this, that they described as a surprising finding is that a building's parking supply is a stronger predictor for car ownership than access to transit. Which is to say, when we provide folks with the ability to store their car on site or multiple cars on site, that's a stronger predictor for people actually then buying or owning and operating cars than that they live within proximity to transit. That's what that study found. I'll go ahead and leave that in the chat momentarily. But I think a couple other things I just want to mention, and I just sort of highlight, the AB 1401 does not eliminate parking. Parking's not going away because of AB 1401. And new housing will probably still have a lot of parking. AB 1401 says cities of a certain size in certain size counties are not allowed to enforce arbitrary parking requirements within a half-mile of transit. But new housing could still have way more parking than even the requirements would have required. That is not AB 1401's domain. It is simply saying you cannot have these requirements within a certain proximity to transit. And I think also important in this, because I know that there's a number of groups in the city of LA specifically that have raised some concerns, because LA has its own transit-oriented communities program, but LA is one city in a region of 88 cities in LA County, in a region of over 100 cities across the LA metropolitan area. And we're just, I mean, we're the biggest city, but we're only one city. And just because we have our set of programs doesn't mean that every other city should also be doing something to be addressing these really vexing and difficult challenges. And what the state bill would do is basically say, here's the state minimum, like here's the minimum standard. You have to all abide by this if you fall within the, if your cities qualify under these thresholds. And I think that's just important for us to, it's City of LA can do what it does, but like that doesn't mean Burbank or Glendale or Santa Monica or Long Beach or other cities are also sort of having to do the same thing. The only other thing I would just offer, and then I'm very interested to hear the discussion at the board here, is that LA County has 200 square miles of parking. LA County has 200 square miles of parking. We have nearly 3 times as much space for parking as we do for housing. And I say that because, you know, we have, you know, this is also for me very much a land use thing. This is a personal thing. Like when we a lot of people get engaged in the conversation around housing because we see folks living out on the streets, people who have an easier time parking a car and living on a car in the street than some other option that might be available to them, because we provide plenty of places for them to put their cars, but not enough places for people to actually have a roof over their heads. And I just think, you know, when we talk about housing and parking, you know, it's just we're so insistent on the parking has to be there for every single house, but not that there has to be a house for every single person. And particularly, this is just personal for me. Like as someone who's had housing insecurity myself at points in my life, I think we, you know, have a responsibility to people in our communities to make sure that we're putting the emphasis on the housing, even if it maybe comes at a little bit of inconvenience potentially. I don't know, but it could potentially come at an inconvenience to you or I at some point down the line. But more importantly, that we're actually providing the opportunities to create the housing so that people can live with dignity. So I'll stop. I'll get off my soapbox.
Very much appreciated. We're going to start discussion with the voting body now. I'm going to ask you to be very brief with your discussion because we're running out of time. So keep it to 20-30 seconds. I'm going to start and I'll be very brief. I just want to kind of amplify something that Luke mentioned, but kind of frame it slightly differently. So I want to be clear about what this is and what this isn't. It's not a ban on parking. It doesn't mean parking isn't going to be built. And I don't see it as about getting rid of requirements. I see it about as expanding choice. What we are doing is making legal a type of housing that is not currently legal for certain types of people that want a certain product, right? People that are car light, people that are car free, people that can't afford that parking spot. This is about, for me, it's a social justice issue because it's about choice. Doesn't mean that every development is going to have zero parking from now on. No, things don't change that fast. It means that, you know, if a developer wants to build, you know, a bungalow court in the Fairfax district, just like they used to, that for people that don't want to have a car, great. If somebody wants to build a high rise in Westwood for students going to UCLA who don't own cars, great. It's another choice. It doesn't mean that there's going to be no parking provision. there's going to be under such a scenario, there'd be a whole range of choices. Zero parking, some parking, lots of parking. So that's my soapbox. And we'll go to Glenn Bailey. Try to keep it very brief, folks, so that we can get to a vote before 8:30.
Thank you. Actually, I thought that we would have the same opportunity that non-members would have to ask questions, but apparently not. I just wanted, it's okay.
It wasn't about questions or not questions. It was about comment time. But you're right that we have work to do in terms of equity in the public comment. We're still new at this, Glenn.
Right. So I'm just saying that we as voting members should be able to ask questions as well. But I'll put that aside and just say that I looked up the bill, and here's my concern. I have a couple concerns. Number one, the legislative and analysis indicates that the definition of major transit stop is an existing rail or bus rapid transit station, or an intersection of two or more bus routes with a frequency of service intervals of 15 minutes or less during the morning and afternoon peak commuter periods. So think about that. Bus lines of 15 minutes or less during morning or afternoon peak commute areas in your area, and then draw a half-mile radius around those intersections where those bus routes intersect. And draw that half-mile radius, a mile, diameter. I mean, a mile across. And I just want to say that I'm an alternative transportation advocate. But my concern is, in order to be a successful alternative transportation advocate, you need to use the streets for what the purpose that they were intended, not to subsidize developers by using them as parking lots because they're not provide parking in their buildings. I realize there are definitely some buildings that can justify this in terms of some of the new facilities to accommodate even homeless folks. But that's my concern, is pushing. I do not want to see Los Angeles become San Francisco or even New York, where they spend 107 hours and $2,243 a year wasted time, gas, and emissions just trying to find a parking spot. Given the fact we have a mix of people with a mix of needs, and that's my concern.
Thank
and
you,
I have
Glenn.
more, but that's all I'm allowed to do now. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Stacy.
I'm going to try not to be duplicitous, but I'd like to correct several things about what Luke said respectfully. Right now in the city of Los Angeles, under state bills, as well as the LA Municipal Code, we do not require 1.5 parking spaces within a half a mile in the TOC communities or near intersection of two rapid bus lines under 1222A of the LA Municipal Code. We only require half a parking space. So that needs to be corrected out. Number two, also under state law and local ordinance in the LA Municipal Code, you do not pay for parking if you don't use it, because we now have by law unbundled parking. So when you go into a TOC building, if you don't have a car, you don't pay for parking. If you have a car, you do have to pay for the parking. So that needs to be corrected. I am known, as Lisa will tell you, as the sustainability guidelines, one of the authors of it. I believe in the carrot, not the stick. And what does this mean? It means I went to Sacramento to meet with Friedman and I have for 3 years, as well as other assembly members and senators. And we are doing something in the Palms area where I live in an area, and I hate the acronym that's known for being NIMBY, but I've got people giving up their cars with excitement. Lisa has heard me talk about this for a year and a half. In our TOC communities, I said we will support reduced parkings lower than what you're required if you will give us a fleet of electric cars for hire, and I will talk my residents into giving up their cars, because if they only drive 4 hours a week, they can walk over and rent one of those cars. And I have an entire community who can't wait for the buildings to get built. That is an alternative to get people out of their cars, because we don't have the required infrastructure yet. So I wanted to have a state bill that provided incentives for providing the electric car fleet to get people out of their cars, to provide the gap in what we don't have in infrastructure. I think that's a way to go forward. Farazard, who spoke earlier, mentioned 2 groups, including the Center on Law and Poverty, that I work with in creating bills. And we've got a proposed bill involving this, and it is the way forward. I don't like 1401 because it incentivizes builders. It doesn't come up with creative solutions we need to encourage people to get it out of their cars. And I know we can do it, but this isn't the way to do it. And I will support anything coming out of Sacramento that provides that gap in infrastructure that we have in Los Angeles. So thank you for your consideration. And I'd love to work in the future, bringing us a bill that makes sense so that we can all tell our children we're doing our job to get everybody out of their cars. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Stacy. Okay, Dan Cagle will get the last comment. Keep it as brief as possible so we can go to a vote. Thank you.
You know, this disagreement that we're having is partly about trusting market forces. I think that AB 1401 will do what it says. It will reduce to some extent. It will enable building of units that have no parking. And that's a good thing. It may require, let me phrase it this way. As LA gets a better subway system, it kind of needs this kind of housing to go along with it. And I don't see a whole lot of carless units being built unless there's demand for it. So a few will be built, and if they rent well, they'll build more. And I think that's a good thing myself. But I understand that passions are very high. People are very attached to cars, and people who want a perfect solution don't really trust market forces to do it. So it's complicated. But if I were voting, I'd probably support it.
Okay, appreciate that, Dan. And you are a voting member.
I just want
I'll
to
remind you.
let me interrupt. It is 8:30.
Yeah, I want to go to a vote quickly.
Yes, and then I just want to remind you that we're supposed to give committee updates and have announcements and stuff. So I just want to acknowledge that it's 8:30 and hope we can wrap up in the next 10 minutes or so if people can bear with us.
Well, I'm going to a vote right now. So I'm going to ask Muriel to manage that vote.
Okay, so I'm just gonna go down the list. So Lisa?
Yes, so a yes is a yes, we're opposing the Koretz
Opposing
motion.
Koretz's motion. Yes is opposing Koretz's motion.
My vote is yes.
Oh, good God, I'm confused.
Okay, so if you're a yes, then you oppose Koretz's motion, and in essence you support Laura Freeman's bill.
Okay,
I think
so
for most
yes
people
is to support
that
AB
logic
1401.
is sound.
Okay. Scott?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, you're calling my vote.
Yes.
I'm a yes.
Okay, sorry. Ernie?
Yes.
Okay. Dan?
Abstain.
Abstain. Okay. Ann Dorsey?
Abstain.
Abstain, thank you.
Yes.
Helen Toko?
Abstain.
Thank you. Jeff Chop? Jeff? Jeff Chop? I'll get back to him. Joanne D'Antonio?
I'm sorry, yes.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Okay, yes. Joanne?
My board actually voted on this last month, and I have to vote no.
No, okay. Okay, Melanie Winter?
Yes.
Thank you. Raquel Valencia? Raquel Valencia? Oh, I guess she left. Okay. Rosina Jacobs?
No.
Okay, thank you. Shelley Billick? guess she left. Okay, sorry. Stacy Schur,
No.
thank you. Wendy Tolero,
Abstain.
thank you. Laura Gonzalez,
Yes.
thank you. Lisa Tarallo,
Yes.
thank you. And Devon Williams,
Devon in?
It's in the chat.
oh, it's in the chat. Okay, thank you.
He voted in the chat. What was his vote?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the yeses have it.
I wasn't called on.
Oh,
No?
Glenn Bailey, what's your vote?
Glenn, oh, I'm so sorry, Glenn.
I vote no.
Okay. So Glenn,
Pretty sure the yeses still have it.
so at 8 yeses, 4 noes, and 5 abstentions.
Motion passes. Thank you, Transportation Committee, and thank you to all of our voting and non-voting members tonight for this rigorous conversation. I'll turn it back over to Lisa.
And thank you, Luke, so much for helping educate us on this. And thank you, everybody, for the education. I still have so much to learn on this issue, and I really appreciate everybody's passions. Okay, we're going to wrap up super quickly with committee updates. Advocacy, we did not meet this past month, so we have very little to share. I'm not going to pull up the slides. It's going to take me too long. Sorry. Transportation, do you want to chime in, Muriel?
Oh, okay, so it's gonna be really quick. Terrence Houston came to talk about Sunset for All, about creating just like this a bike lane for Sunset, like some missing arteries, so that we could try to he did this very informative presentation on a bike lane through Sunset. He also wanted to do some fundraising so that they could get not the engineering board, but BOE to help do like a plan for it. So if you have any questions on how to get for fundraising, just email me. We had talked about 1402, and we're also moving forward with speaking to Delhi DOT regarding EV car sharing. And yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you. Dan, can you talk about the Energy Committee, please?
I can. I think the key thing that we've been talking about lately, amongst the many important issues, is the notion of a climate test for city projects. Portland's Sunrise movement asked, or rather demanded, that the city of Portland institute a climate test so that things the city built made sense in light of the climate emergency. And so we're exploring doing something similar, encouraging the city to do something similar. And it's very exciting.
It is super exciting. Thank you. The Trees Committee, Joanne?
Yes. The Board of Public Works had a report from Rachel Mallarich, the city forest officer, at their July 2nd meeting. And I'm going to send a link to it to all the Trees Committee members. And the reason is that the Board of Public Works actually asked to hear more from neighborhood councils and also from council offices. And this Board of Public Works is really trying to be more of a listening Board of Public Works. And I am impressed with that. As a result, our August meeting, we don't meet in July, but at our August 28th meeting, we're going to talk about how to facilitate giving input to the Board of Public Works.
Okay, thank you. I have one announcement and then I'll open it up to other folks. Our next meeting like this is August 8th. We're going to talk to sanitation and environment about the community wildlife habitat certification, and also probably have somebody from city planning talk about the transportation demand management ordinance. This will be an opportunity for all of us who attend to provide feedback on that ordinance, which is coming. Any other announcements from anybody else? I think that's nothing. All right, thank you guys. Thank you everybody for participating. And thank you for the very informative educational conversation. I always love how much I learn from all of you folks. That's it. Have a good evening.
Good night, everybody.
Hey, Lisa, could you have the board take a look at what constitute a majority vote in terms of how abstentions are counted? Because many neighborhood councils, the abstentions, some neighborhood councils abstentions aren't counted at all, but in others, they don't count towards the majority, and you have to have a majority of those voting yes in the affirmative to pass something. So look at my comment in chat. You could take a look at the bylaws, see if I missed something in the bylaws in terms of that, and you may want to think about putting some clarification in your bylaws since you're amending them anyway, or looking at amending them.
We talked about that. We agreed. I mean, maybe somebody will change somebody's mind, but we agreed we don't need to clarify because it's just they're not, we don't factor them in, so it doesn't affect anything. So
But it's not in your bylaws, and many of us, have ways of operating of our neighborhood councils that are contrary to that. Just want you to know. I don't know how many of the folks in it participating in this meeting are in that situation, but I know there's a number of neighborhood councils that their bylaws have different, and they may have an expectation that when they abstain, it's included in the overall tally and not discarded.
Okay, I hear you. That's a good point. And so you said you made a comment like that in the chat?
Yes, I did.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I always review that, so I'll be sure to do that. Thank you.
I believe Robert's rules might also have a provision to that effect.
We have a challenge. So, and for us, Faramaz, you might not know this, but a lot of folks abstain, not because they don't have an opinion, but because they don't currently have the authority from their neighborhood council to vote. So we're in sort of an unusual situation in that we have a lot of abstentions, but we're hoping that will change to some extent.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, folks. Are you folks staying on for any particular reason? I think not. All right, have a good night.